Today I'm going to teach you guys how to make honey whole wheat bread. This recipe contains slightly more whole wheat flour than a typical light whole wheat bread. Honey is added for sweetness, and the combination of milk and water give this bread a delicate tenderness. With bread machine making, the most important step is accurately measuring and weighing out your ingredients. This is necessary to make sure that the bread rises, bakes, and tastes correctly. Inaccurate measurements can cause your bread to rise too quickly or fall too quickly. It's important to put the ingredients into the bread maker according to the order the recipe says. Liquids and fats are poured in first, followed by your dry ingredients, and finished off with yeast. It's very important to spoon or scoop your dry ingredients loosely into your measuring device. Do not pack them. For this 2-pound loaf of whole wheat bread, this is what you'll need. In the first layer, you need half a cup of water. It's important to remember that temperature is extremely important. Your water and dry ingredients need to be roughly 80 degrees to help the yeast activate properly. Next, you need 2/3 cup of milk. Again, your milk needs to be roughly 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The milk enhances the flavor and increases the nutritional value of the bread. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to add 1/3 cup of honey. The honey adds a delicate sweetness to the wheat bread. After adding the honey, we need to add 1 large egg. Again, the egg needs to be room temperature. Eggs help add flavor, richness, and tenderness to the bread. The last step of our first layer is our fat. We need to add 1½ teaspoons of room temperature butter that has been cut up. Cutting it up simply helps it incorporate better. Now that completes our first layer. Flour is the most important ingredient used for bread making. It provides food for the yeast and adds structure to the loaf. For the first step of our second layer, we need to add 2 2/3 cup of bread flour. Bread flour is also known as baker's flour. It's high in protein and is a white wheat flour. Next, we need to add 1 1/3 cups of whole wheat flour. The whole wheat flour is milled from the entire wheat kernel. Hence, it contains all the bran, germ, and flour of a whole wheat grain. Next, we need to add 1 tablespoon plus 2 teaspoons of gluten. The gluten is also manufactured from the wheat flour and yields a very high protein content. Wheat gluten can improve the structure, increase volume, and lighten the texture of your bread. Last step of our second layer is 2½ teaspoons of salt. Salt not only adds flavor, but it limits the growth of the yeast. Table salt, sea salt, or kosher salt may be used. And last, we need to add 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon of bread machine yeast. Through a fermentation process, yeast produces the necessary carbon dioxide gas to make bread rise. Yeast feeds on the sugars, the sugar from the honey and the yeast and the flours to produce the gas. Once you've entered all your ingredients into the bread machine, you need to start it on your basic cycle. This all-purpose setting is for white breads, wheat breads, and whole grain breads that contain 50% or more of bread flour. Your machine, what to expect. Your machine will first preheat, and that will help the yeast perform optimally. Then it will go through its first kneading cycle. This will distribute the yeast and moisten the gluten in the flour. The dough will then go through a second kneading cycle that will thoroughly mix all the ingredients and moisten the gluten strands to a stringy elasticity. This is when a ball will begin to form. Next, you will go through a resting period. The first rising phase will begin after all the ingredients are mixed well. The second rising phase will begin, but they are separated by a punch-down phase. This is necessary to deflate and release the trapped carbon dioxide within the dough. After the third rise, the bread is ready to bake. The dough will have taken shape and formed to the pan. Once baking is complete, turn out the loaf and cool it completely before cutting. This loaf was a 2-pound loaf for 32 ounces. It cost me 64 cents to make, compared to a similar 20-ounce loaf of Miss Baird's honey wheat bread sold for $2.79 at our local grocer. Thanks for watching.